date we reached. It might be nice to make that announcement just before we close out.
Yeah, okay.
Just to kind of confirm that with everybody on the record.
Hey, man.
We had this discussion. There's some water bottles back there. I didn't do your pictures of water and coffee and stuff. But there's water bottles in the room. So grab there for you. Yeah.
That's on the application. That's on the application.
Yeah, which was not like yeah, I was going to ask you about that. Isn't it December?
What?
Laura?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering.
I don't think there's no guarantee that get re-up, but this will give it a shot. Well, I'm thinking back in my life, there were so many projects I was involved in, and then I changed jobs.
Are we supposed to get those for that?
Sure.
They have some.
Some project I never solved. So this is kind of important. So.
How's it going? Pretty good. Yeah, I'll just repetitive.
That's, I've been on the board, I'm on my second term now, so basically it's the same year that we got it down, so.
Well, I think experience.
Many years.
Many years. Since I've been ahead of the game.
This is Laura.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Hi, I'm Dan.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
No. And you've already nice to get this place.
We did.
Hey, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
Pretty good.
Thanks for saying that.
No problem.
Long time no see.
You got the magic slate.
How you doing?
I'll get something.
Just repetitive.
How's the traveling day?
Yeah. Bad. Actually, the worst thing has been my commute.
Okay.
I work up in Northwest Portland.
So let me
I
know.
left at 4:30.
And then because our volleyball association.
No.
Okay.
And then
Today I'm blaming Joe Biden.
we'll talk about.
Oh, that's right. I forgot.
Because that was gone. That kind of
Got the door unlocked, turned off.
You guys will discuss, and then I believe it's public comments.
Yeah, after we are through whatever questions and so forth, then if they want to. Third Thursday of the month. But this will take the place of our October meeting. And then we're not going to meet again until December 4th.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's pretty exciting.
We
To get some free time.
skip Thanksgiving, so that means December 4th. Next meeting. So we're not back until then from tonight.
Fly by.
I don't think you're good for
I'm very tired.
They said it could be.
Oh, really?
They moved up to.
I think I was in and out in about an hour and a half.
Did the whole.
Oh, yeah. The whole, yeah. Yeah. The serious one.
You pushed it to my side, it means you think I need to read
That's
it.
here for the lawyers, because this is what
Oh, really?
No. No, it was
Move then. I don't want to be confused.
I have about a 50-50 chance of becoming a cancer or something.
Well, 3 hands.
Yeah.
You got two. I'll take one.
Well, see, I sensed there wasn't enough. And I brought, and look, I even got a spare pen.
We got plenty of those.
Probably going to get real excited with all this money.
We'll see. It's always an exciting day. So. Yeah.
Kim?
Yeah, we still have to finish getting our matching funds.
Right. Well, it's pretty close though, isn't it?
Yeah, we're about 20 million short.
What's 20 million when you got 480 in
I think it's
No.
Just have
It
one.
is. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's true. It is. It is.
I can think of one. We started with
Buildings to build, things like that.
Go down the bottom of the hill.
Yeah, kind of plans and then they build the combined life sciences building is just opening down there. That's the first building of the campus. Between it
got a jump ship?
and where the tram comes in, they got this roof. That was really planned as that development on the research park. And it's not going to go private enterprise.
Oh, okay. Wow. Nice.
The shipyard.
Nothing's happened on that.
And that's
Yeah.
your prerogative. You're
They
ready
went
to
out last night, that one tomorrow night.
I think there's another.
Well, we have a couple already.
Where, I don't think you've ever been down there. So, you know where the parking lot is?
the city board.
CHH.
I will check
That actually, we're getting ready to break ground on actually building another building.
So somebody's going to tell the
Several
like
of us
to
there.
identify themselves.
I was there for 2 minutes.
But that will be all probably in that.
So I don't know, because I left when I was building the Capitol.
You which one of these I'm supposed to put
Oh,
here?
yeah.
I haven't seen it like this before.
It's this.
Oh, that. Okay.
Neighborhood association.
Or is his switch flip?
Oh, that's right. Okay.
He said to do it.
Oh, no, just move it back.
Oh, wait.
To the left.
I'm just keeping it
Oh,
up.
we just-
Mine-
where you go?
Overview
Yeah,
of
well,
the
actually-
agenda for the meeting.
Mine's to the left.
Everybody went out, so I think maybe. There's really nothing to see. You can forget.
So,
That's okay. I'll
no,
just-
it's a
I'll
Windows
just-
desktop.
But
This says Votecast. Votecast. Or maybe it's this. Maybe not. Oh, that's the installer. No, that's not.
Okay, turn this on, hold on.
Everybody has.
I'll be calling the meeting to order at 6:02 PM. Thank you for joining us. It's the Library Board joint meeting with the Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee to discuss the library addition siting. And I'd ask for the Library Board, we'll just go around and introduce ourselves, and then if you could introduce yourselves as well, too. I'd appreciate that. I'm Laura Ingham. I'm Chair of the Library Board.
Clerk Kellogg.
I'm D.A. Hildebrand, and I'm also on the building committee.
Eileen Sheridan.
Don Wright.
Bob Burns, Chair of the Park and Recreation Advisory Committee.
I'm Dan Tupper.
Mike Mitchell.
Roger Palatides.
Joyce Gifford.
Dustin Moyes.
Okay. And
Scott Archer, Community Services Director.
And Maureen Cole, Library Director.
okay.
Hopefully you can hear us with this mic, I think so. Well, good evening to both the Library Board and the Parks and Rec Advisory Committee. Again, I'm Scott Archer, the Community Services Director for the city. I'm responsible for the parks and recreation activities of the city. So we arranged this joint meeting for the two boards to meet with the intention and the hope that that the Park and Rec Advisory Committee would be able to come to a recommendation this evening regarding the siting plan for the library on the park site. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. And Maureen and then our architect and project team are going to give you some further information about that. But as I understand it, the library board has already made a recommendation, and I think Maureen will probably speak to that. So for the Parks and Rec Committee, we put this together on relatively short notice because of some of the timing issues related to getting this topic back in front of our city commission for a formal recommendation. And again, right now we're not focused on any of the design and that kind of thing, but the recommendation is focused on the site the footprint and how it will impact the park itself. So not looking for recommendations on that. If you want to be engaged in the design part of that, I think Maureen will probably be able to tell you about those opportunities to do that. So that's what the objective that we're looking for this evening is. The hopeful outcome would be a recommendation from the Parks and Rec Committee, which will be presented at next Wednesday's City Commission meeting when Maureen and her team give that report to the City Commission. As we do this evening, and I'm going to turn it over to Maureen, what we're hoping for, just for everybody's sake here, is that we're going to have a report from on the project from staff and from the consultant team. Then that's an opportunity for the boards to discuss and deliberate on the issue. Before any recommendation is formulated, we would recommend that you would open the floor for any public comment and then go back to some type of a motion or recommendation. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our Library Director, Maureen Cole.
Thank you so much, Scott. I just want to quit kicking the table. Thank the Parks and Rec Advisory Committee for agreeing to meet on such a short notice. I really appreciate it. It helps us out a lot, and I hope we have an interesting conversation tonight. I know we will have an interesting conversation tonight. So we have a little bit of an update to give you from the architects, but first I just want to kind of review where we are. As far as I know, both boards are basically on the same page as far as the presentation or the information presented to them to date. So both of them, you guys will be seeing the architect update is new information to both of you, but it was contained in the attachment, the PowerPoint attachment that was also sent out to you earlier that you've hopefully had opportunity to review. The library board has made a recommendation for the option number 4, which is the one story that the biggest part of it goes out towards 6th Street. There's many pros and cons to all the options, but they felt as far as the library is concerned, that creates the best library on one floor and ease of access for a lot of things. The building committee is the other body that has seen like all the information and the community input and everything. And that body is made up of the architects, which is Scott Edwards Architecture, the project manager, which is Charlie Johnson from Shields, Oblitz & Johnson, the contractor, which is represented, Steve Anderson represents PNC Construction, David Frazier, the city manager, myself, Denise Kai, the assistant parks director. Let's see, D.A. Hildebrand is the liaison from the library board. Brian Shaw is a community representative. Is that everybody? I think that's everybody. So we've been meeting since June, every other week, to review all the information that we've gathered and all the feedback that's come in from the community. And the building committee also recommends option number 4. Again, from the point of view from construction and library point of view. And those are the frames which we're looking at things. I know that you guys are looking at things from a parks point of view, and that's why we're here to talk tonight. Will be a very interesting point of view. So with that, what I'd like to do is introduce our architects, Sid Scott and Joan Jasper from Scott Edwards Architecture, and they'll give us the update, and then we can start discussing. Thank you.
Thanks, Maureen. My name is Sid Scott, Scott Edwards Architecture, and I think this might be the most people I've ever seen at a DS at the same time that we're talking to. So delighted to be here tonight. I was telling Mo, I think we're probably on meeting number 20-some now that we've been out and meeting with the public, and it's been fantastic. I think the input that we've got on the project, and what we really learned is that this is a very important project to the city and the folks that live here, and so we want to make sure we're doing the right thing. So what we were going to do is a brief overview of just the process that we've been through. And many of you have heard a lot of this, so we will keep it brief and then be happy to answer any questions as we go or at the end. So away we go.
Okay.
So just in general about the project, everybody, I guess the first line is the best one. It's the Carnegie Library and Park is much loved, and we've learned that. So we've got that right up front. The project scope that we're looking at is adding 15,000 square feet onto the building, the 1913 library. We're in the really starting the schematic design process, so that's where we're gathering information. We've presented a number of options, and we're trying to narrow those down to a final solution. The building is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Things that, just some general things we know about with the park, the pieces of the park that people are very interested in, the tree canopy, the play area. We've got some open area on the back side. And then I think just the general character of the building and the very Beaux-Arts kind of entry off of John Adams, the front of that. There was initially a soils report done with several borings that were behind the library, and we've since had additional borings done to really test that site and see what's down there with the expectation that there is basalt, and that is what it's come back and told us. There's basalt, and it varies in terms of depth, but it pretty much follows the contours of the site up there. And so there's loose basalt, which is more like gravel, and then below that is a hard basalt, which when we talk about hard basalt, we probably would be in a situation of blasting in order to excavate that. Also, groundwater on the southern third of the site, we found that down about 9 to 10 feet, which we would have expected. That the existing elm trees haven't been infected with the Dutch elm disease, and there's a process going on with them. And then there were also initially a traffic study done for the project, which talked about parking requirements, and it came back saying that no new parking would be required, and we're in the process of getting that updated just based on current conditions. Anything else, Joan? Okay.
One of the things I think most of you guys have seen, a lot of these schemes, what we did since the geotech was new, we just kind of outlined kind of the amount of excavation and what that entailed, whether it was kind of the soft decomposed basalt or hard basalt. So you'll see that overlaid on the original 5 schemes. And again, this is just a recap to bring everybody up to speed, understanding what everybody has seen and has discussed.
So diagrams that we've talked about with the park, the zones of the park, and then let's go into the options. And so we've got the 2-story option located directly behind, and you'll see up there in the left-hand corner where it's shaded. And so the first lighter colored shading is loose basalt, so that's where we anticipate to hit that. And the darker color is into the hard basalt.
Mm-hmm.
So that's option number 1. Option number 2 is the curved option, which initially was thought of to try to work with the trees that are there. And again, you can see the amount of excavation would be into basalt there. This option would be into loose basalt, which is much easier to excavate than the hard basalt.
And this one also shows a 6th Street entry versus kind of a entry through the Carnegie.
Right. If you back up to that very first one, I forgot to mention that with that one, is that we were really looking at that as having the primary entry through the existing Carnegie. So that would entail making that front entry ADA accessible with a ramp, new stairs, and so would need to develop the front area. So looking at option 3 was a simple bar building on the back of the Carnegie. And all of these, as we've talked about, could either be with reusing the existing Carnegie entry or creating a new entry. The last 2, this one included with a new entry off of 6th, something that would engage with the spray park and the play area there. and you can see the amount of basalt that that one gets into.
Oops, did I? You can see kind of right in here, because you're starting to eat into that northeast corner. And then you also, with the one story, that gets to be almost an accessible roof, you know, because it gets dug into the hillside. So it would, unless you really build the walls taller, it will be pretty much buried on the northeast.
Option 4, one-story wrap. So this was spreading the building out, wrapping it around towards the south side, towards 6th Street. And you can see there the amount of excavation that we would get into. And as Maureen was talking about, this was the option that the library board had recommended. Option 4.2, so this is the wrap idea, but turning it to the 7th Street side. So you can see there we get into both the tree canopy and also into the real excavation area there up on the northeast corner of the site. And then this initially started with the idea of how we could preserve the existing play area. So that has also been a big part of the discussion as we have went along with the design. Option 5, going underground, and you can see there that we would be into basalt throughout that the full range of the addition there.
And note too that even though we go underground, this would be kind of the 15,000 square foot footprint. And the idea is that, you know, you could potentially, you know, put a water feature back on top. You'd basically have an earth roof. I mean, like about as robust a green roof as you could get. But you would still have to have stairs, skylights, to let in natural light to the library below, as well as egress stairs. And we put it over here, still trying to kind of maintain kind of that front axial entrance, historical entrance to the Carnegie.
Yeah, and just as a side note, you know, with this kind of going this direction, we would estimate we'd probably need to go down about 20 feet in order to build this underground. And there would be items that would be protruding up, you know, light sources and stairs and that kind of thing.
Right, and you can kind of see that, you know, here. Here was the idea of having these planters around a new water feature, and that could be a clear story that allows light down into the lower level of the library. And then, and I don't know if we need to go into this, but we just went and did the exercise, you know, kind of documenting the process and then going through the pros and cons that we heard, both from the library board, the building committee, to the neighborhood meetings. So again, we just tried to document, and we just kind of go through all this. And this was really presenting to the McLaughlin last week, really just trying to give them an update of who we had met with, what was presented, and what was concluded, if anything, from those meetings, to try to just make communication clear. And then just quick studies on kind of the fill, cut, and potential excavation. And then this is a tally sheet and put together, you know, all the options matrix listed above. Let's see if I can get my little, well, it's not, here we go. Well, it was working.
Need a pointer.
There we go.
It is.
So, you know, here's the options up here, and then we've listed library board, library building team, and the library staff, Parks and Rec Advisory Committee, Oregon City Commissioners, Historic Review Board, and then the open house and in-library voting, along with the McLaughlin Neighborhood Association. And you can see here, which was discussed earlier, the board making the recommendation to go to option 4. Parks and Rec on the meeting on the 25th, you know, had not really seen these options in detail, but requested They saw it with the 6th Street entrance and the playground options as requested by the city commissioners. And then Historic Review Board, who we presented to earlier in that week, thought that option 1 and option 4, kind of given their relationship to the park and or library, would probably pass review. And then this is just the tally from where we were at the last meeting and in library voting to date, and you can see the kind of the bottom line spread. Anybody have any questions on this one? No? Okay.
So then we moved on in terms of looking at the options as the direction that we'd gotten from our last meeting with the City Commission. So looking at option number 1, this again showing the basalt area that would be into excavation. It has the main entry through the front of the Carnegie, again with ramping and stairs in front. Would maintain the play area as it currently is, and also preserve, a fair amount of the canopy.
And just a quick perspective view. And go ahead.
And so the second part of the option, we were asked to take a look at creating a 6th Street entry. And so this shows the not using the existing Carnegie as the primary entry, so it would not require putting ramps and stairs in front of the existing Carnegie, and put the entry on the 6th Street side. And so we can go to the rendering of that, and you can see it would create essentially a plaza on that side, and create a new entry coming in off of the 6th, which also would connect to the John Adams as well. Then taking a look at the option number 4, again, you can see how the excavation is impacted there. And then the other part was looking at what is the potential for revamping that play area in front and reutilizing that area into something perhaps different in terms of the play area. So this would keep the entry, would be into the new piece of the project, creating a plaza, and basically doing like an idea of combining the plaza and a play area together. Mm-hmm. So it would continue to have a spray park, continue to have a play area.
And the ability to potentially create a fountain or something that could, off-season act as like amphitheater and or stadium steps, for just congregating, but it would be more kind of integrated into the architecture. And then here's
what it could possibly look like.
Mm-hmm. And again,
we need to put on here artist rendition, I think. How that's always kind of a little loose. But the idea is to really activate that front area and then create something that would really engage with a new entry to the library.
And then the concluding slide is really just, reinforcing selecting a single scheme to move forward with on October 15th when we meet with the city commissioners, because we're really working towards a historic review board package the end of December, as well as site design review, so that we can break ground in the summer and not lose. One of the things with the soil is it's very dense, silty clay, and if it gets wet, it's hard to manage. So it's much, much easier to open up the park and start excavation in early summer. And so we've got some timelines that we're trying to maintain. So, and that's concludes our presentation.
Yeah, so lots of information. Happy to go back through any of it, but wanted to give you an overview of the process and the things that we've been talking about and looking at in terms of design.
Do you have any idea on cost of removal of the hard basalt? Is that exponentially more than the loose basalt?
The hard basalt will be far more expensive than the loose basalt. The loose basalt is essentially gravel, so that can be scooped out. The hard basalt, you know, our anticipation would be that you would be into blasting to loosen all that up.
Wow.
And, you know, we're looking at every option, almost all of them with the exception of the curved scheme, will have some basalt excavation. And the testing that's been done, there's been several ways that it's been done using kind of a radar system to try to determine the depth of the basalt along with the testing. That just gives you a general idea, so really we'll find out more once you start construction. I mean, that's truly the time that we'll find out. But it gives you enough information to make a pretty good educated decision on it.
My question kind of related along that, though, and I was hoping you'd go a little further. Are any of these cost prohibited now because of the amount of excavation that would take? In other words, should we already cross any of them off the table because we couldn't afford them?
Well, looking at the underground option would probably be the most expensive based on the amount of basalt that we would run into in terms of the excavation. The second would be the option for wrap reverse, which goes along 7th, because again, we're into the steepest part of the site where there's going to be the most excavation. From a building standpoint, they're not dramatically different in terms of just, you know, once you get out of the ground from a construction standpoint, you know, we were looking at is 1-story less or more expensive than 2-story, and they're not dramatically different. So really it would be the excavation side that will be I think the biggest cost difference in them.
Because we did an analysis too between kind of the 2-story and the 1-story, you know, because with the 2-story you have the elevators and this and that, and maybe a little more square footage, and nothing is finite. But with the 1-story, you potentially have more site development. You know, so, you know, at this stage, neither one's really a deal killer.
Right.
You know, I mean, we have a budget, and, you know, we will design to that budget. And so, you know, number 5, it was the best scheme, you know, was, you know, kind of a what if, you know, and I think, you know, it's knowing where the basalt is, and it's at about 13 feet, you know, at least the borings, you know, that we have. You know, so you've got the excavation to deal with, you've got the groundwater to deal with, and then you've got the long-term roof membrane, you know, to kind of deal with, you know, if it's underground. So that's probably the excavation and the membrane are probably the biggest wrinkles in that.
I noticed the voting tallies were very similar. There didn't seem to be one design that far exceeded the others, and that's just an observation. And I'm also curious about what the McLaughlin Neighborhood Association thought about your recommendation, or the recommendation on number 4.
And since this tally has been done, and we've got a lot of members from McLaughlin Neighborhood behind us, I think, you know, just like you guys, you know, you wanted more discussion, more time to think when you met last time. You know, I think they're in the same, you know, kind of in the same waters, and I'm sure we will definitely hear something more consolidated from them.
There's obviously a lot of trade-offs that
Yeah, they're
that have to
planning
be
on
made.
speaking tonight. They're prepared
Okay,
to discuss that with you tonight.
I just wanted to mention one thing, and, you know, normally when you start a project, you look at and you go, well, there's an obvious solution, or there's 2 obvious solutions. And the interesting thing about this project is that there has been many obvious, you know, good solutions to it, which I think has been very exciting. I think it's really caused, I think, some good discussion and thinking about the project. So, you know, we're excited about all of them.
I guess now is the time we can ask questions, so.
I just got kind of I just want to make sure I'm not confused. On the original package, option 4 was called 1-story wrap. And then the things that came out, I think, after the city commission meeting, where it says 1-story courtyard central entry, that says option 2.
Yeah, so we apologize for
That's
that.
Is that the new
That was
version
number
of 4?
4, yes.
Okay. I just
thought
we said
thought so, I just wanted to
we
make
had
sure.
collapsed the options,
Yeah.
but then they opened back up,
Yeah.
so we.
And
That was at a moment of collapse on the numbering system is all.
And one thing I would ask, when the McLaughlin Neighborhood Association speaks, it looks like there was a pretty dramatic swing between your first vote and your second vote toward option 4.2 reverse. And I hope maybe somebody can speak to, what did you find out that seemed to move so many people? I mean, the first MNA number 1 was 2 people, and then they have a second open house, and 19 are in favor of that. So I'm just curious, from their perspective, what made that happen?
What I'm recalling is that the first time they saw all the options, only the 4 existed. The architects responded to conversation with McLaughlin and added the wrap going over to the 7th Street side. That was in direct response to comments that we heard from them. And so, we showed it to them and they liked it.
Okay.
I think,
Thank you.
too, that's a lot of it was at that open house that
Yes.
were not just McLaughlin neighbors. So when it says McLaughlin number 2 and open house,
Oh.
is that right? Yeah. And that was a meeting
That's correct.
that I attended.
Yeah.
And so there were more than just the McLaughlin neighbors here. But when I add up these numbers, I only have 150 people saying something, and then McLaughlin getting a chance to vote twice. Some of them might have, so we're looking at 125 people making a decision and looking at these options, and I don't think really that's enough, for one thing. The other thing is, now that you've narrowed some of the options, obviously the underground, hey, you guys are thinking outside the box, it looks really cool. That option's off the plate. I mean, it's really not workable. So people who voted for that now get a chance to, okay, what would be their second choice? And so when I look at your tallies, I don't think that really tells me anything.
Good point.
If that, just needed to say that.
Want to make one clarification point on that is I believe that we did it at all the meetings, but we asked folks if they were going to vote for the underground option to also vote for another option in case that we found that it was technically infeasible to do that.
And Joyce, I totally agree with you that this is not scientific counting, because the votes that happen at the library, I know that there's somebody that stuff in the ballot box. I recognize the writing over and over, and that's great. Is it you, Don? Stop that. But I mean, it's an opportunity for people to give input, and of course, at the library, it just reflects only those people who come to the library and then take the time to do it. So this doesn't really mean to say,
Right.
yeah, it's scientifically surveyed or anything, but, it's kind of interesting, like Bob said, there's interest in all the options, and, but we can't get a vote of everybody. All we can do is it's out there, give people an opportunity to give us their comments, and then have the boards and the people who are most informed, because they're accepting most of the information, do their best job to make a recommendation to go forward. So,
one of the things that jumps out to me, being on the PRAC committee, is that the park is about half the size. It will result in about half the size that it is now. And I'm wondering if there are any plans to kind of overcome that deficit of the loss. For example, the idea of the new spray park appeals to me. I think the one that's there currently now is, my guess is used about 8 or 9 months of the year, then it's not used as a spray park. The rest of the time it's just kind of unused. So the idea of using this new spray park for something during the off season is appealing. But the loss of the space, could you speak to that? Or?
So, that's when you look through the pros and cons, one of the obvious pros of going 2-story is it takes up, you're losing about 7,500 square feet versus the 15,000 square feet of just park area. And then one of the other pros with that is the ability to maintain the play area if you wanted to keep it like it currently is. Then we look at it from the con side is that a 2-story library is a more difficult to operate in terms of just the programming of a library and the operation of it. So there's pluses and minuses with all of these, right. And it's the idea with the wrap when we were looking at that, and one of the concepts there is to actually have internal courtyard in the library. which we thought was a nice way to bring some of the park into the library. And to engage the interior of the library with the park. And then I think the other part of that was to relook at the play area and see, could you get a lot more out of that area, that the area that was left in front of the library, in terms of maintaining something that would be very active, something that is, and I liked your point about the amount of the year that things are used. I think if there was something like that was more of a plaza, maybe it's used year round.
I have a question about the polling and what's been presented to the neighborhood associations. I know that you've presented all these different options and explained the pros and cons, and basically what we are doing here is trying to balance out pros and cons.
Right.
Have you presented it to people in a way of asking them to list or categorize what's important to them? What's more important, long-term operating costs over the next 30 years versus maintaining the historical nature of the park? That way you can kind of get a feel from the residents what categories of pros are more important to them. Have you given it to them in that sort of way?
Well, what we talked about initially was just looking at the park is like, what is the most important aspects of the park as it is now? What areas do you think are the most important? So we looked at it from that standpoint. There was, we did some initial community outreach where we were going through a mind-breaking exercise where we talked about with various groups that were involved in that, and the community as well. But really talking about what are the priorities, what do people want to see with the library, and it came down to let's make the best library we can.
I guess I want to know, what are the priorities with the library juxtaposed against the priorities with the park, and where do those two priority lists intermingle with one another?
Do we have the list from the community outreach with us?
No, we don't. But I mean, it was, everything like Sid said. It's hard to get into operations and long term. Because you're really talking kind of 30,000 feet. The bond was passed. It passed with, a majority, and we know we're getting a larger library, so it's how best to manage the two. And that's really kind of what we've been trying to do, both balance the needs of the library, balance the needs of access to the library, balance the Carnegie, the park. It's a hard one, and like Sid said, I think 1 through 4 probably have the best resolve, and kind of the most egalitarian, to both the park and to the library. Where if you do the rep reverse, that saves a certain portion of the park. But when we did the survey, and again, it could be different one day from the next, it was pretty, equal. Like in the front, the sides, the 7th side, the back side. So other than doing a survey and then kind of creating a tally, which, some people make informed decisions, some people, you don't know everything, so it's hard to...
Well, I would say, from the park standpoint, though, something that's been very consistent, and I would say a lot more kind of midstream with the project, was the emphasis on the play area. And so that was a response when we met with the McLaughlin neighborhood. They said, well, the play area is very important, which we fully understand that. And so that's when we looked at reversing it and allowing that play area to stay as it currently is. And then, that presented some... it's one of those, that goes into the canopy, so then there's folks that don't want to lose the canopy. And so, it's just, to me, it's something that you look at the pros and cons of them all, and there's goods and there's pros and cons with each one of them. But I think the play area has been a very vocal part, and that's why we responded with this idea, could we create something new, dynamic in that part of the park. So you're still providing all of the same amenities that you have in a different way. Yes.
I've got two questions, and they're totally unrelated. Just like every other part of the city, the parks budget is extremely limited, and we've got a lot of priorities. And I just want to make sure that if the amenities, in particular the playground and display park, depending on which site is chosen, if those amenities have to be relocated or rebuilt, that's coming out of the library budget and not the parks budget, correct?
Well, I will let Maureen respond to that one.
Well, I was imagining that if we had to do something with the spray park particularly, which would be the big ticket item, that would be on us. If we're also moving the playground, and parks might have a few dollars to throw at some equipment, that might really help. But I was thinking that it would be happening because of us, and therefore it would be up to us, right?
Great, thank you. The other thing, on the Historic Review Board, I see that, they said that two different plans would probably pass. Are those, could we infer from that that's the only two that they would pass, or did they only see those two?
That's correct. Those were the two that we reviewed with them, was 1 and 4.
Okay, so they only saw those two.
Right,
okay.
And just so you know, the process of that was we went to the City Commission at a workshop and presented all these options, and the direction that we left from there was they wanted us to look further at 1 and 4. So that was the direction we were headed at that point.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Scott, I have a
Yeah.
kind of a follow-on to what Mr. Burns brought up earlier, and it relates to our focus is the park, obviously, but as a citizen, I'm also concerned about efficiencies in the library. And when I read the pros and cons, I'm, again, not seeing a dollar value that equates to 1-story versus 2-story in efficiency. So can you dive a little deeper in that? Are we looking at an additional full-time employee specifically because of the result of a 2-story? Things like that. Can you help quantify that for me?
Yeah, so that's what we typically see, and Maureen can speak to the staffing side of that, but that is typically the case. When you go to more than 1 story, anymore like when we look at designing modern libraries that are designed for the future, because, we don't have any idea what a library is going to look like in 20 years even now. Things change that fast. And so what we look at is, and what we recommend is you build the most flexible kind of a building, kind of space that you possibly can, so that you can adapt with technology, with program services, what the community wants. So in a smaller library like this, 1 story is advantageous because you have a maximum flexibility on how you can use that space, and it also is a real advantage in terms of the supervision of it, the operations of it. So it's and I will just say for sure is the most efficient from that standpoint. But there's many examples of 2-story libraries. We've done 2-story libraries. It just does take more in terms of the staffing size. And Maureen, you want to follow up on that?
So, Sean, what I'd have to say is that I'm not in a position, and I will not be in a position because of the bond situation, to actually hire people. But if I was on 1 story, the likelihood that I could reassign people to other activities like outreach in the community and things like that would be much higher and more likely, as opposed to if I was on 2 stories where I absolutely had to supervise both floors. And in the situation where we would have the 2-story addition, the basement, more than likely, the existing basement, would probably be closed off area. It would turn into staff space, and it's the least nice of all the space, so that makes sense, and that's not a killer on anything. But I definitely don't want to supervise 3 stories, so that would kind of make that decision for us. But so, since I'm not really in a position to hire anytime soon, it would just be the ability to put people on other way more interesting and more community-focused activities and broaden our scope and reach of what we're doing instead of having to be focused inward on supervision.
Thank you.
Yeah. As I sit and I'm looking at this, the 1-story wrap with the courtyard, which I guess the library board that was their kind of favorite one with the courtyard. As a substitute teacher, I go to all of the middle and high school buildings in Oregon City, and several of them have courtyard areas. The high school has a courtyard, little enclosed courtyard area. I know Gardner Middle School has this little enclosed courtyard area, and they become dead zones. They're not used. The high school courtyard is just kind of a pass-through. It's a shortcut to get to the cafeteria. And if we're looking at preserving park space, how important is that courtyard? I really wanted to make sure that would continue to be used as an open, taken care of courtyard, because I see too many of those kinds of spaces become derelict. So then we could maybe cut some off of the end down where the spray park is and fill in library space in that courtyard space, and then leave more playground space outside. That was just, as I'm sitting here digesting this plan in front of me, that thought came up. So
that's actually a great point, and this reminds me of a couple items back to your point about priorities, and several of the things that came out of the very initial meetings was lots of light in the library.
Well, skylights work. You don't have to use courtyards.
Yeah, I'm just bringing up the several of the points, and you're absolutely right. I mean, the building is maybe narrow enough that you always have access to outside light, that kind of thing. But it just did remind me of several. And the other one was is really having a nice inside-outside relationship with the park.
I just want to jump in here. We did do a handout at all the neighborhood association meetings that I went to, that have happened over the last 4 or 5 months. And it was called What's Important to You. And one of the things that many, many, many people checked was the indoor-outdoor relationship that Sid is talking about. So bringing, what that means. And so in addition to light, that's kind of as specific as we got for park priorities as it intersects with the library, but it was really, really important. It was one of the very top things that was right up next to the children's room as being like the most important things that the library would think about. So I think that's one response to it, but there's many responses to that aspect that you could do.
And this is a concept footprint, and I think that courtyard's there to kind of hold that idea. That idea that you walk by the Carnegie, into the central entry, so you're participating externally with the Carnegie. One of the givens is that the Carnegie itself will be an active space within the library. It's not going to be, the dusty historical, or stacks, that kind of thing. And I think it's that idea is that you're walking through a park into a library with still a view to the park. So whether that is a skylight, whether it's a skylight and maybe that's central, that's kind of central information, with some beautiful trees and you see through, that kind of thing. I think it's more there as a gesture than it is an actuality.
Is there any concept so far for what the courtyard is going to look like? Because I live in the McLaughlin neighborhood, and I have small children. I have a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old, and I would quantify that park as kind of a big kids park. And coupled with Joyce's comment about courtyards being dead zones, it seems like a really good opportunity then to have more of a younger children outdoor space, which would tie in that indoor outdoor, but also put it to good use, because
This one
parents
right
of small
here,
children,
or here.
The
Inside one?
The inside one, because parents of small children really like to segregate them from the bigger kids. And that slide is a big kid slide.
There's a big slide with park kitty corner, though, and I think that's been, as we've discussed amenities in this park in the past, it was always, you're right, the age group for this one is, I think, the 5 to 10 or 5 to 12 they call it, and the 2 to 5 is the top part, that's kitty corner.
But then tying it in with the courtyard, which then they do tend to be underused.
What is the size of that courtyard, if you could give me approximate dimensions at all for square footage?
Maybe 20 by 30. Yeah, maybe.
15
15
by 30?
by 30. I bet it's 15 by 30, maybe.
So I just want to reiterate, we are not to design on this at this point. I mean, this is a concept only. So if this is the direction that, whatever direction is finally selected, we'll then really get into design on that. So if it was this way and with the courtyard, we'd really look at the size of that and make sure it's something, if that's, what you end up wanting, something that is, really usable.
The size of this room? No. Smaller, much smaller. Half the size of this room. Smaller.
About a quarter.
Yeah, quarter the size of this room. Dead zone, I'm sorry.
Go.
Only in concept.
Exactly.
Not to keep belaboring the courtyard, because I know it's a concept, but Maureen, to your staffing issue, if you put that right in the middle of your floor, you're really making it difficult for one person to watch that floor.
If it's
With a,
windows are open.
and trees, and, I mean, I assume it wouldn't just be everything down below.
Well, honestly, I'm not sold on the courtyard myself, so,
Okay.
yeah.
But moving away from that, you've said a couple of times that this is just a concept, and obviously for PRAC, maintaining as much of that park as possible is key for us. How much is this thing likely to creep after we sign off, and all of a sudden it's even a bigger footprint and we lose even more park?
Well, I think as far as just the overall footprint of the building.
Yeah.
Based on, we have a finite budget for the project, and I would say with certainty it's not going to get any bigger in terms of the 15,000 square feet.
Okay.
I just wanted to introduce Kurt Lango. He's our landscape architect on the project, and you wanted to mention something on the courtyard side.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak a little bit about the courtyard, because we've done a number of these courtyards for libraries, and actually they're great spaces, particularly for young children. We like to think of them as kind of learning gardens, and particularly with libraries, they like to have some controlled spaces for like reading time activities. So it's a perfect place for kids to be able to get out there with some chalk, with some books. It's always supervised, and we take, particularly care in how we plant it, visibility, but they're really kind of ideal spaces for young children.
Kurt, while you're up, could we go to the option with the play area, just to describe a little bit about what you were thinking there?
Actually, while you're bringing that up, Scott, the last meeting we had, a question came up about the historical nature of the basin for the spray park. Did we ever get an answer back on that? About, is that a historical item or an object?
That's something that's going to have to be explored a little bit more.
Yeah.
We didn't research that specifically, but
It's not contributing to the national
It's
register.
not for the Carnegie, but it's maybe old enough itself, was the question that came up. So there's a question whether it can be touched or not.
It was brought up, and we left with a question not knowing the answer to that, right?
Yeah.
When we were meeting with the Historical Review Board, Christina Gardner-Robertson, I always mess that up. She mentioned to me that it was considered a historic feature, and then I asked her later, like, okay, what does that mean? And it means that if we want to change it, then we're going to have to explain why we want to change. It doesn't mean it can't be changed, but we're going to have to explain why we want to change it. So, is that accurate? Wait, I've got staff in the audience. Denise? Tony? Do you want Denise wants to comment?
Oh, gosh, sakes.
I think Denise is probably a pretty good expert on this.
I thought she was leaving after you.
Sorry. So when we did the spray park renovation, the idea was least impact, so that we didn't put in spray toys and bright colors and detract from the historic nature. So that was the mandate we were given when we did the renovation originally, to fill in the basin and to renovate the nozzles to low flow spray nozzles that we currently have. So the idea was not to change it so dramatically it became a focal point. And so when we went through the Historic Review Board, we went to the McLaughlin Neighborhood Association, we did our due diligence in all of the public input meetings, and it was just to make it so that when you looked from the street, that wasn't a focal point. It wasn't what drew your eye to everything. So it didn't detract from the historic relevance of the Carnegie itself.
So that was our mandate when we did that original, well, second original renovation to the spray park.
I guess that means that the proposal that's on the board now would be satisfactory with the new spray park? Is that what I just heard?
I think there's a lot of discussion that would have to be done about the spray park, but that I think they'd be open to listening to it, but, you know.
Yeah, I think certainly if we were to take another look at the spray park, we would take cues from what the Historical Review Board wanted before and what Denise was talking about in terms of not having a lot of bright colors, something where you're protecting the views to the library. I think this was just a way of thinking about if we were to remove or relocate the play equipment, how would we do that in such a way to really create an area that would be active, that would have a lot of energy, and really create a great place for kids.
Mention some of the features of this.
Oh, sure. So with this, and whether it's a square or whether it's ultimately a circle, it's really more of a graphic at this point. The blue circles represent nozzles that would be at grade similar to the spray park you have right now. But the idea is that there might be stepped seating right to the north of that leads to the ramp that goes up to the front door, so that when those nozzles are turned off, it could be a stage, a temporary stage for performances, just a place to gather, when you're waiting for your parents to come pick you up. And then you have the play area that's right at the corner. So not only could we try to get some really high slides like you have right now, swing sets, but maybe even add a couple more pieces of play equipment.
Okay. Other questions or comments?
And I'll get back to what you're saying about a place for the kids to play for, story time with chalk and stuff like that. There's this entry courtyard that could be used for that. Again,
Well,
I like.
except for all the people walking in and out of the building. I mean,
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks, Kurt.
Yeah.
Any more questions for the consultants who are here?
Well, what do we do next?
Wow.
Recommend public input.
Scott, does the Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee need to take a vote on our favorite plans?
So I think the first thing we need to do is we need to hear from the public.
Yeah.
I'd like to do that next,
All right.
please.
Right.
Can I
And then
hear
there'll be
from them
further
again?
discussion, and then
So-
we'll for that.
For your public input, I'd just like
I'll
to
leave this up.
mention if anybody would like to speak that hasn't signed up, would you please fill out a comment form and hand that over to us here? And if it's okay with the boards, I would just read these in order that people signed up to you, and you could have those folks come up. So the first that signed up is Jesse Buss and Kim Walsh, who are actually representing the McLaughlin Neighborhood Association. And they've got a handout that they gave me. I'm going to pass those around as you're talking.
You want me to go first? Hi, my name is Kimberly Walsh, and I live at 516 Madison Street, and I'm here tonight speaking on behalf of the McLaughlin Neighborhood Association. At our last meeting, we took votes, so what I'm saying is not just my personal opinion, but comes from everybody who was at that meeting. The McLaughlin Neighborhood Association feels that open green space, mature trees, playground space, and preserving the historic integrity of the Carnegie are important. Our first choice for an option is the underground option. And I'm going to go on with our other thoughts, and then Jesse is going to explain more about the underground option. And we realized that the underground option may not move forward, so we wanted to make sure that we gave opinions on the other options. Because of the things I just cited that are important to us, we feel that an addition which has the smallest footprint is what we would like. If the underground option is not chosen as a fallback position, the MNA supports option number 1, with the entrance being on the 6th Street side. This option has a small footprint, does not change the Carnegie, so there's no ramp in front and there's no internal changes, and preserves the play area. This option does sacrifice a large maple tree on the Jefferson Street side. We would love it if option 1 could be modified to save that tree. MNA would also likes option number 2 because it has a small footprint, does not change the Carnegie, and saves the maple tree. However, as formally presented by the architects, option number 2 does move the play area. MNA would support a hybrid option 1, option 2 combination design that reduces the footprint of the building while retaining the existing mature trees and the play area. We do not support in any form the design option number 4. This option has a footprint so large that the Carnegie Library is reduced to being an attachment instead of the other way around. In addition, this option reduces usable park space, requires unnecessary removal of many mature trees, and eliminates any usable space for an inviting and functional play space. Additionally, we ask that the Commission and PRAC look at adding park space or upgrading park space to our neighborhood to mitigate the park space lost to us with the building of this addition. A couple ideas that I thought of that might be possible for this is that where the old swimming pool used to be, where the tennis courts are now, that area is pretty ill-equipped and underutilized. There might be something at Waterboard Park at the base that could be done. And there's could be other possibilities. Thank you very much for your time, and Jesse's going to talk more about the underground option.
Yeah, thank you, Kim. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, my name is Jesse Buss. I am also a resident of the McLaughlin Neighborhood Association, and these comments were authorized by the Neighborhood Association very recently. The packet you just received, did everyone receive one? Okay. Yeah. On the top, you have a letter that was just submitted a few hours ago. You can see it's addressed to the City Commission and not to you folks. That's because of the time frames involved here. We didn't have time to submit materials to you guys in time to get it in your packet, and it was only finalized this afternoon. So we got it into the City Commission since they're meeting next week, and hopefully you guys have time to digest this. It's a 6-page letter, and then there's attachments as well. I don't know if you need to take a recess to read through it if you want, but I would encourage you to do so. Or if you have any questions, you can engage either Kim or myself in that right now. But the basics of the letter, in which we would ask you to adopt in your recommendation to the City Commission, is the underground option. And I know that's been represented as the most expensive option, but I think there's actually some evidence that it won't be and may even be the least expensive. I'm not an expert, but I'm going to show you what I have. You've heard about the boring holes, the testing that's been done on the site over at Library Park. There were 2 initial boring holes that went down behind the library, and you can see all the testing holes on this page, which is the second part of your packet. They're highlighted, the boring holes are highlighted in purple. You can see John Adams on the southwest to orient yourself, and you can see the spray park and the existing Carnegie there. The 2 initial boring holes that were done are on the back, and they went down. So you can see on the next page, this is actually from the geotechnical report that was done on the library in 2013. Borehole 1 goes down 6.5 feet before hitting basalt. Borehole 2 also goes down 6.5 feet. If you go further up on the slope, which is back towards Jefferson Street, borehole 3 goes down, borehole 4 goes down 5.5 feet, and borehole 5 goes down 2.3. Those are all on the back side of the library. The only borehole that was not done on the back side is borehole 3, which is approximately where the swing set is right now. And you can see from the analysis that goes down 13.1 feet before hitting basalt. So that's all we have as far as boreholes for Library Park, but what that indicates is a slope of the basalt, or could indicate a slope of the basalt, from really shallow behind the library and steep to pretty deep where the swing set is. So as the McLaughlin Neighborhood Association has discussed, it'd be nice if we had some other data to see maybe how deep it is in front of the existing structure or to the side, closer to the other side of the spray park. And in fact, what we found was not located on the library site. If you go further back in the packet, there's a site plan from Foundation Engineering, which is also a map of the Ermatinger House, which, as you all know, is currently undergoing construction. And also highlighted in purple there are the 3 boreholes that were done on the Ermatinger House, which, again, right across the street. You can see one was done close to John Adams, one was done on 6th, and one was done closer to the parking lot. So pretty evenly spread throughout the lot. And you can see the results from the borehole geotechnical analysis. Those go down 25.3 feet to basalt, 26.5 feet to basalt, and another 26.5 feet. So if you combine these results, which were done in 2012, with B3, which is on the library site, you have a slope of 13.1 feet below grade to 26.5 just across the street. So that's even further evidence that we've got a really steep basalt slope underground. And as Mr. Scott indicated earlier, the underground option may need 20 feet of excavation. If we've got a 13.1 deep basalt grade in swing set area down to 26.5 across the street, we may have 20 feet to work with. We may not. But what we would suggest, and the McLaughlin Neighborhood Association's recommendation and commendation to you is to recommend, if not adopting the underground option immediately, to ask for some more boreholes, specifically in front of the library, so we can see, is in fact this basalt deep all the way along the front, where there really aren't any big mature trees and anything that can be disrupted as far as vegetation? And can we, in fact, bury this park and preserve almost all of the open space above ground? So that's what that second part of the packet is. The third part, which has the photos, these are just examples of other underground structures that have been built recently around the world, really. This first page, it's got some notes on it. You can see it's the Apple Store on 5th Avenue in Manhattan. And you can see on either side of the main entrance, which is that glass structure, there are fountains. And underneath that entire half block, or that entire block, it's between the avenues, you've got a giant, vast space under there. And on the second page, you can actually see what it looks like underneath there. I was in this building a month ago, and it's this bright. There's a lot of light down there. And what they did with lighting and the open spaces was pretty amazing. They did a water feature too on top of their structure. We could do a spray park that we have existing. Further back in here is Green Square Library and Plaza, which I believe is still in the design phase. You can read about that, but there's some, these are not actual photos. The Apple ones are, that's been there for years. But the library, these are just renderings, and you can see this is underground with an open courtyard. You can see another glass entry, but the entire structure is underground. The third page is just more examples from around the globe of what light entry might look like, skylights or entrances. And of course, we could do something completely different that would blend in with the Carnegie and not be glass, or, you know, who knows? We're not at the design stage yet, right? We're just deciding where to put this thing. So, again, we're available for questions, but I recommend this letter to you. Basically, if you're not going to recommend that underground option be adopted immediately, please strongly consider asking the City Commission to do a little more research here. We may be able to bury this thing without digging too far into the basalt. There's an issue of water intrusion, which hasn't been brought up because I think the basalt was the main issue that was discussed earlier as the impeding factor. and I haven't included it in this packet because I didn't have enough ink to print it all out. But the Ermatinger House, actually, the last 3 pages in your packet, the second part of the packet, do have an addendum from the Ermatinger House, and it's underlined where it says the basement groundwater levels are expected to rise above the basement floor elevation. And if you look at the plans for the Ermatinger House, there's an elaborate system for drainage under there. They're aware that they're below the water table. The technology exists to drain the water out. There's no reason in the McLaughlin Neighborhood Association's perspective why that shouldn't be considered and done. If you have any questions, we're available for that.
Jesse, I do have a question, and my big one is water. Because I know that the Atkinson Church across the street has perpetually had water issues in their foundations and basement from when it was built in 1920. And they have tried lots of different ways to mitigate that, and it works for a little while, and then it doesn't, and we have to come up with a new way. So I know that there are ways of mitigating the water issues, but over long term, I haven't seen a lot of solutions for that, especially because, you remove the water, you drain the water off from that area, and where are you putting it? Where the water's got to be going somewhere, and there is an underground river that goes through there. It all meets up down at Singer Falls. We see the water going over Singer Falls. It's all part of what's there.
Well, I don't want to speak beyond my authority, and I'm not an expert. However, I didn't know that the church was built in 1920, but that was almost 100 years ago, and we've got a lot better technologies for new structures now than we did then. It's one thing to do mitigation for an existing foundation. It's another to design it differently, just like the Ermatinger House is doing. But that'd be a better question for Mr. Sid Scott, or the geotechnical folks, if you in fact recommend that they go and do a little more investigation on the site. But again, the Ermatinger House Foundation is below water grade. I believe, I read through their plans, and I think that it's just going into the stormwater treatment, not just being pumped into neighboring properties. So.
Okay, so we're talking about a much bigger area, much bigger footprint than the Ermatinger House, obviously, for the library. And that's a lot of water. Again, it's right now flowing underground, and it goes down Singer Falls. And what are we doing? I can't see that that's ecologically good to take all that water. Then again, we're just going to put in our storm sewer drains, and But you're right. It needs. I didn't know that there were so few test holes drilled and which sides they were on, and thank you for bringing that to our attention. I appreciate that.
My pleasure. Also, as to the footprint, again, I think it bears emphasizing that a recommendation would not just be to put the footprint for the underground where it's been proposed. In the packet, it's shown just on the 6th Street side. If we did some bore tests on the front of the library on the John Adams side, maybe the underground option can be rotated and placed in front of the library instead of back towards the basalt where 6th Street meets Jefferson. But again,
May I say something? You would block the view of the historic Carnegie building with another building in front of it? Is that what you're saying?
No, the idea would it'd be
underground in front of it.
Correct.
Okay.
There would be structures on top, would there not?
Yeah.
With air vents, and there have to be some things up on top of the underground structure.
Certainly have to be some element of skylight.
Yeah.
I don't know
Right,
where the entry would
skylights,
go. But again, they would be low to the ground instead of towering. The jewel of the park would remain the jewel and the centerpiece. The rest would just be trimmings. So.
No, I know.
This is the underground?
I know at our last park meeting, one of the main concerns that came up, of course, is not just preserving the space, but was also preserving the play area and the actual equipment that's there now. But my impression was if we touch some of that equipment, it's kind of grandfathered in because it's there now, but it's not the code and it goes, correct?
Well, we'd have to explore that further, but
Okay.
most likely it'd be tough for us as staff anyway to recommend that same type of equipment, but that's, you know, to be.
Because that's the issue, because there's, I mean, it's not like they were going to, I would guess, we're not going to like bore this under the thing. I mean, we take all that out and excavate out this building. So the spray part goes, the equipment goes, we dig a big hole and we fill it in, and then we put something new on top. So the equipment, and then there's a good chance that equipment goes. So.
Right, the trade-off with that would be that we would have more park space.
We preserve the space.
Yeah.
So, okay.
So there's a lot more detail in the cover letter as well, if you care to peruse that.
Other comments, questions from the?
I know that McLaughlin's then second option would be the two-story block behind. So there, and one of the concerns that's been brought up on that is that its massiveness, being 2 stories, would overpower the Carnegie from behind. I mean, just as you're looking at it, you know, you see the beautiful Carnegie building, and then there's this, you know, huge structure behind it, which is kind of why the 1 story is kind of nice, because it doesn't tend to be massively overpowering the current Carnegie. So the Carnegie, with its massive brick walls, remains the centerpiece. And so I know that, you know, the 2-story does take up a lot less of a footprint, and I do like that. But again, the 2-story that creates all the other all the other problems. You know, the cons of a 2-story over 1 story. My biggest problem would be its massiveness overpowering the Carnegie.
Well, and I think, as has been said quite a few times, each of these has pros and cons. And you kind of brought up, you know, what's important, and I think the association feels that preserving the most park space is one of our key things that's important to us. I was up on top of that killer big slide the other day, and it has a great view. And I'm thinking a 2-story building, you'd have a nice view toward Portland from a 2-story building too. I understand what you're saying, but I think preserving the park space is what the association, we feel pretty strongly about that, having a small footprint.
I do want to say, though, at our meeting the other day, when it was spoken to us about, you know, the parks that are in McLaughlin neighborhood, and it is true that the old tennis courts, that something needs to be done at that park. But you guys also need to remember you have the promenade park. There, you know, maybe something could be done along that. That's all in your neighborhood. And there's not just, there's Barclay Park, there's Abernethy Creek Park, there's Atkinson Park, there's the Waterboard Park, part of Singer, is it Singer Creek Park, the one that goes up Lynn. So there's a lot of parks in the neighborhood, and you're right, maybe we need to consider putting in some additional structures, maybe, you know, at Barclay or someplace that has easy access to the kids, or the old tennis courts, to help mitigate the loss of some of the play equipment.
Other comments?
Good. Got some more
If
people
not,
signed up.
we
We've
have
got more
others.
people signed up.
Thank you very much for your input.
So the
Appreciate
next person we had signed up is Linda Van Haverbeek.
You understand that. Hi, Linda Van Haverbeek. I live in Oregon City. I've been on the library board for 8 years. I am the past chair of the Friends of the Library. I'm a founding member of the Library Foundation. And all those times that I have looked at all those things, I've taken what was good for the library and what was good for the city, and I trust that you will do that also. What's good for the library, what's good for the parks, what's good for the city. And with one of my other hats is I have some disabilities, and I very much favor something that's going to have parking and the door close together, because I can only see them getting worse. And my third hat would be that I'm a member of the Park Place neighborhood with over 1,300 households in one park. Thank you.
Thank you.
And the last person we have signed up, unless anybody else intended to sign up, is John Drentlaw.
Good evening. My name is John Drentlaw, and I live at 3220 South Shore Boulevard, Lake Oswego, Oregon. And came here just to hear what the subject was. I didn't have an opinion, but then I heard some of the challenges that came up with option 5. And wanted to share some thoughts about that for the board to consider here. And I believe that it could be both economically and environmentally sustainable benefits with that particular option. And my background is I went to Arizona State University and majored in construction engineering. And there, when I was in school, a 97,000 square foot library was built underground. And part of the reasoning there was because of the geothermal benefits of that approach. And down there, it's very similar to around here. You have very hard soil. It's a caliche there, which is harder than concrete. And listening to the other concerns about the water, recently out in Rondler Acres wetlands, was working on a building with over 100,000 square foot footprint, and that was significantly below the water table. And with that facility, could not allow water in there. And there's pumps that are put in, and those pumps would reposition the water to another area for stormwater preservation on the surface. And those are some things that I think you have in your parking lot in this particular building. So there might be some options to consider. Then also with the basalt, I see basalt as actually a commodity because I'm on the Planning Commission for Clackamas County, and I recently was involved with a land use change for a gravel pit. And basalt is actually a commodity that we have within the county here, and it is used sometimes for architectural finishes as well. And with that, we all know that a gravel pit, it can be excavated and it's blasted out. And the reason that it's excavated and blasted is because the sale price is much higher than the cost to extract that commodity. And so that is an opportunity to actually realize some capital here for the library and have benefits. And also, if there is basalt there, you will reduce the amount of shoring around the perimeter of your excavation, and it'll have a lot of benefits because of sustainability for the facility. I think if you're looking for LEED certification, this will be an advantage that you'll have. Many times existing structures, different portions of them are retained for sustainability reasons. So these are just some thoughts I wanted to share with the group here to consider.
Thank you very much. Okay.
I think that's the end of the public hearing, and since we had a little bit of new information brought to you from the McLaughlin Neighborhood Association, I just wanted to give the you guys an opportunity to perhaps ask the architect or the project manager some questions.
I have a question because the last gentleman who spoke mentioned the geothermal benefits of placing a structure underground in Arizona, but Oregon tends to be very damp and very wet, as are the basements, and I know that dampness is like cancer to books. So is there going to be an increased cost to building a library structure underground?
Well, could you?
I don't know.
Yeah. You have to speak to a microphone.
It's up to the chair to call a speaker back up or not.
Yeah.
This is kind of back to
So
deliberation with the project team.
I'm going to ask Mr. Scott to come up and answer the question regarding geothermal.
Thank you.
Thank you.
First, I just want to say I really appreciate the passion for the underground idea, and we wouldn't have moved forward as far as we have without thinking, that there is some merit to that idea. And so, it really, from my standpoint, comes down to technicality about how you go about doing this, and then ultimately the cost of doing it. But there's some major advantages in terms of underground, in terms of maintaining heating and cooling. The idea of geothermal. I mean, just the Earth keeps things at basically the same temperature, so you could capitalize on that with an underground option. So, I mean, there's a lot of good environmental sides to it, and I think the two things that were brought up, one is water, and that's always an issue, and in Oregon, that's a big issue. We're anticipating that there is a spring that runs through there. There is a spring that has been covered up at some time, so that would have to be dealt with. And there are certainly, there's all kinds of buildings around the country and in Oregon that are underground, and you can put in a dewatering system to keep it dry, but you are relying on a mechanical system to do that. As far as the basalt goes, you don't know how hard it's going to be until you start. So I think that's one of the big things with the underground option is of all of them, it has the most risk in terms of what you're going to discover as you start. And the way that the option is currently set up, which runs on the south side of the library, if you started up at Jefferson, we would be a little better than 20 feet in basalt of chipping that out or blasting it out. And then mid-block, where the last boring was, we'd be about 7 feet or so into that at that point. And they're absolutely correct. We don't know what it is on the street side on John Adams, but I think that you're looking at, with what we do know, it's there is a significant amount of excavation work you'd have to do in basalt to do that.
I've just been waiting to tell everybody about my idea about what to do with Singer Creek, which is at a higher elevation than the library.
I tried to tee it up for you, DA.
The Singer Creek is inside a pipe that's made out of bricks and made wood. And we know that it's, Denise, isn't it just slightly under the curb out in front of the, did you run into it when you were putting new curbs in?
It runs just, sorry.
On 6th. Anyway, we thought we
Put on the
would,
plan.
since it's higher, we thought we would just simply reroute it through the floor of the library. And we'd have
It's a water feature.
It would be a fantastic feature.
Yeah.
It'd be a great indoor water feature.
And
That,
Maureen had some peculiar objection about
as well as building facilities maintenance. So
Two objections.
it does run just off to the Pioneer Center side. It runs right under the sidewalk, right under the Pioneer Center, and then it comes across Center Street, runs out here in front of our parking area, right down on 7th. So it kind of jogs across, running 6th along the Pioneer Center. I don't know exactly where it is up above that, but I know along the Pioneer Center, it's underneath the sidewalk there, cuts across and comes over to where it's right in front of our driveway, what used to be our driveway entrances in the old schematic of this building. So when we changed the drive lanes out, we actually ran into the box culvert right out here in front. So it's not a small culvert.
it emphasizes that we've got a serious water.
It's a water feature.
It's a lot of water.
Yeah. And then just a response on the borings. I mean, part of the rationale for the borings was we wanted to look at the southeast side of the lot because we know that we're anticipating that would be the most basalt that we run into, which is basically what the soils report verified for us. So, you could certainly get another boring out by the other side of the spray park. But I think, you'd have to look at it all the way across the site, and again, significant amount of excavation would have to occur. And I mentioned 20 feet down. I mean, it may be that with, dewatering systems and all, we need to go down further. I don't know that at this point. Did that answer the question, or?
Are there any other questions that came up that you want to ask him while he's up here?
Actually, I have one. Just about if we went with or recommended the underground version, what kind of ADA accessibility do we need to plan for that? I didn't actually really look for that in the schematic, but I mean I mean, how much parkland are we going to lose for that? Because you can't just be a set of stairs that then go underground.
Right.
So
I think then it would come down to, because the way we're showing it right now is that it would be flat, and that it would be at grade level. Well, reality is it probably wouldn't be that. We'd have to have, you're gonna have to deal with the slopes that are there, so part of it would be sticking out a little bit. We would need stairs, exit stairs that come up out of there, so there would be elements on site for that. We initially had thought that it would be a new entry into the lower version, creating a new entry and then connecting to the Carnegie. But I think there's been some interesting discussion about you could actually use the Carnegie as the entry and then go into the underground addition, which I think would be a very interesting way to do that. Where then you would have to have a couple of exit stairs that come out of there, obviously an elevator, but we're going to have an elevator. If any level change, we're going to have an elevator in there.
Since you brought up ADA, can I ask a question about option 4, ADA? It seems like that's an awful long walk for somebody with a disability and elderly. Do you know how many feet that is?
From
option 4?
From which point?
From 6th Avenue, that's where you would be coming from, right?
Well, the idea with option 4 is that the new entry, let's see, can I get that up on the screen?
That's with the courtyard?
Yeah, correct. Oh, there we go. Yeah, so the idea with this is that the entry is, it would essentially be like walking from the front of the Carnegie to the back of the Carnegie to the new entry.
Outside.
Right. Well, the thought is we'd have some kind of cover for it.
Okay.
But, this, again, very conceptual. And then you could also come in from the 6th Street side.
Drop off.
With a drop off on that side. And there could either be an entry over there or a covered walkway that would bring you in.
That's what I was referring to, the 6th Street entry. That's still a little bit of way for an elderly person to walk. And but you weren't showing the covered, so I guess that would make some difference.
Yeah, we would anticipate that there would be some kind of a cover that would come out, and then also the idea of creating a cover along that area so that you would be under cover as soon as you hit the building, basically.
Thank you.
Can you go to the underground? I just wanted to point out a couple things there.
Let's see, where are we? I think, I have to go back.
So, as I was just saying, what we would be looking at is, hey, that's pretty cool. I can move that. So, up in here, we would be excavating probably 22, 24 feet down, I'm guessing. In the center here, 7. And, I mean, it's certainly potential that out here we wouldn't be in anything. Or I would guess there's probably something, but, obviously it would be a lot shallower. If you were going to go underground, and I think that's an interesting idea if you did it across the front, because clearly that would be the lowest impact of what we'd expect in terms of the basalt. I think that just from an architectural standpoint, you'd really have to think about how you'd do that and maintain the entry through the Carnegie across that building underground. But again, very possible.
What is the structure in the far right? It looks like all glass. What is that?
Over here. So this was the idea of creating a new entry. So that would be that's shown right there as a new entry structure. So that would have a stair and an elevator in it. And that was what we were talking about was the earlier idea. And I think if you went this option, I think a better option really would be to look at creating the entry as part of the Carnegie. And dropping down through there.
How large is the one that's on here now?
Oh, it's probably, it's probably a couple thousand feet.
Yeah, 30 by 80, something like that. I mean, and I think if you did go underground, you would look at, with preservation of the park area and reutilizing the Carnegie, and then creating, you'd have to really modify one of the two rooms to kind of create a gracious, accommodating entry.
Just
there.
looking at this, it doesn't seem like you preserved any of the park space that you talked about earlier.
It's
I'm not, so in the underground option?
In the one that's on the screen,
Yeah.
that space I asked about, it looks like that encroaches upon the park space, does it not?
Yes.
Okay.
So the idea with this is that, you know, you're still, it's still a structure, so you're going to be limited to what you can put on top of it.
Even the underground doesn't preserve the park space.
Not
That was my
completely,
comment.
and I think, you know, if you did go that's where Sid's saying that you would really try to minimize, you know, the intrusions, but yet you still have to get natural light.
Yeah, you got to have
You
light,
know?
and these are some wonderful examples that they presented, and I've been to some of them. I mean, they are wonderful, and
But
and like
they-
I said, we wouldn't have went this way if we didn't think there was a way to do this. It's, you know, how feasible it is, and that's, you know, ultimately, I think, you know, there's a real cost impact with
But
it.
it didn't survive as an early option, though.
No,
Right.
I have a question. The McLaughlin neighborhood was, their second choice was option 1, 2-story with a 6th Street entrance. Okay, so we don't have any slides that represent that.
We
right?
do, yes.
Yeah.
You do, because
Mhm.
I didn't see one on my thing, so I was looking at.
It's right here.
Okay.
This is like a big menu kind of project, you know, we just dial up any of the options. Yeah, so this one represents the 2-story, the symmetrical idea, right behind the Carnegie, and the entry is off of 6th.
And do you have any side view renderings of what that would kind of look like?
Go
You
to
do?
the rendering there.
Okay, you do have that one, all right.
We saw that at our meeting. And it preserves the original front.
That's
the
correct,
key.
that's right. That was the key to this one, and that's how this actually started, was the idea, well, I think there was some,
And it minimizes also doing anything to the back wall of the Carnegie too, so we don't have to worry too much about seismic, yeah, on that.
Yes, so, I mean, that's a point that we didn't bring up tonight, but it's one that I think we've probably all discussed at some point. The idea of what you'd have to do to the existing building to use it as the entry, and quite a bit of seismic work required there.
Yeah, and we won't really know the answer to that. We know if we alter it, what we have to do, but we won't really know the extent until we get into the actual library planning. You know, none of these, I mean, all of these schemes, you know, again, have pros and cons, but can be solved for library, you know, to various levels of success.
Any more questions for the architects?
For all the options, I'm saying that would be my favorite at this point.
This option with the entry on 6th?
Yeah, the 2-story option with the entry on 6th, it preserves most of the park space. You know, as much as I would prefer the 1-story, the 1-story wrap does take up a lot of park space, and again, I'm starting to get uncomfortable with the courtyard.
I'm wondering if you all have questions for us as library board on why we chose and recommended what we chose.
We'd
since
love
there was
to
a lot
hear.
of thinking that came behind that, so want to ask a specific question, or?
You know, so the library board chose the 1-story wrap with the entrance on 6th Street, or the entrance in between, the plaza
We looked at
entrance.
both of them. We looked at both the entrance on 6th Street and then also the adjusted courtyard. And I know a lot of our discussion centered around how a 1-story is more economically feasible in terms of staffing, programmatically. It could mean more for the community. I also felt that although the park, and I need to say I'm a McLaughlin neighborhood resident. I live on Monroe Street. I have 2 small children. I use that space on a regular basis, and both the Tot Park and the Big Kid Park, since I have a 4-year-old and a 9-year-old. And I felt that actually though the option 4 seems to take away from the park. I actually liked how it honored that front space, which is so frequently used, and that I envision that side naturally becomes a children's area with windows that you can also see the park, be part of the park, even on a rainy day, with an overhang that would allow you to sit there on a sunny day and watch your children play and have that sort of flow between. So I don't see it as eliminating park and play space. I see it more as an expansion of that. Do you know? So that's why I was in favor of it, in addition to it being a better option in terms of a library piece. So that was my thinking behind that. So I don't know if others...
Yeah, I come from a construction background, so there was an awful lot in my mind about the cost, both of construction and operations, for the future. But one of the things that I did see and felt was most important in option 4 is the total flexibility of the structure for the future. Somebody asked us at one point, well, what are you going to do to expand the Carnegie in the future? And our answer was, well, we would create a branch rather than try and build in the park again. But the one-story option gives us this really immense flexibility for future, which we know now technology is going to change quite considerably.
I also wanted to mention one of the reasons I applaud the creativity of option 5. I found it really intriguing at first, but for me, the separation that you would have physically from the original Carnegie is pretty big for me, in that you're not going to see it. You're not going to be as easily connected to it. And that the Carnegie itself is part of the park for me. So as much as I think it's really cool, I feel like it will not be connected to that space in the same way that the other options would allow for.
Well, are we getting ready to make a declaration here?
Well, I think we need to have some more discussion. I wanted to bring up a topic that was touched upon tonight. I mentioned it with Scott Archer the other day. I don't want this to appear adversarial, but I feel there's a need for mitigation in this project, regardless of whether we did option 4 and we demolished the old playground and we put in something a little sweeter. There's still a 7,500 or a 15,000 square foot building that's taking up park space. So, when neighbors cut down a street tree, they have to put a certain amount back, and so my own opinion is that there needs to be some mitigation here. I'm not sure what level we need to accomplish that, and whether it's at another place in this park with new equipment or whether it's revamping Ladderette Park that's been brought up tonight. But it's just a general topic. The McLaughlin's comment about green space, we're losing a lot of green space regardless of what we do with new play equipment.
Well, I think the fact that Ladderette Park came up is actually a relatively exciting development, because we know that has been a problem. That park has let's just say it's not anybody's favorite. And the fact that it's a for want of a better phrase, this is a possible leverage point where we could start the process of looking at a way to improve that park. I mean, obviously this is not a promise, and there's a process we have to go through to do that. But this may be the impetus that we need to do that, and suddenly turn that into something for the community rather than something that is less than desirable. So that's an exciting outcome, actually, I think, or an exciting possibility at least.
I have a question. I represent actually an out-of-area seat on the board because the library district is much, much larger than Oregon City. It expands to Beaver Creek and out to Redland. And in listening to the conversations, I was curious as to how many parks serve this community, not only Oregon City, but the neighborhood. And I think Joyce read some of that out. But this is the only library. It is monumental not only to Oregon City, but to a greater community. And it's critical that this does not get forgotten when we're talking about swing sets and other things. This is for my grandchildren, your grandchildren, and I find sustainability incredibly important, and if this community can trade off for other green spaces and still come to a jewel of a library that serves everyone would be a wonderful thing. Burying that thing underground is painful when I hear that, because we're talking about learning technology for the next generation. And if you have an opportunity to expand green spaces as a community, that is such a golden ticket that you have. And it's something that you can still explore. I am a huge fan of the number 4 option. I think that the ability to integrate an existing park system, even if it gets shrunk, to someone who maybe normally doesn't use that park, but suddenly it is part of their learning environment, is an asset. And I think that Sid is the guy to pull it off. And it's exciting to bury it underground. I just find that sort of obscene, and that's just my opinion. So.
Don't say what she means. Well,
Bob,
anybody have a proposal? Or,
I can't resist
go to
saying
it.
something. I hear loud and clear what the McLaughlin Neighborhood Association said. It does feel as though option 5 was essentially taken off the table, perhaps not with enough consideration. And so that's a concern. I agree completely with what has been brought up by Sean and Joyce as far as mitigating for the park space that's going to be lost. And with the hesitation that I feel like we haven't gone far enough down the road with option 5, I personally don't think that 2 spaces, one of 8,000 square feet and one of 7,000 square feet, is any less flexible than one of 14,000. I don't have a library background, but I do have a background in staffing large pieces of ground, large buildings, for security reasons, for customer service reasons, that kind of thing, in a retail background. 8,000 square feet and 7,000 square feet, it's a lot of room. It's very flexible. You're going to have, in 14,000 square feet, you're going to have more traffic flow issues, you're going to have more noise issues. With a 2-story plan, you gain 1,000 square feet, as these are proposed. So, to me, reluctantly, because of my concerns about number 5, I have to say that, in my opinion, option 1, the 2-story with the 6th Street entry, would be my choice and would be my recommendation.
Anybody else want to make comment?
I think I listened to your last meeting intently earlier today, and you guys, I think, if I heard it correctly, polled each other before you voted. And so rather than that's just kind of hodgepodge, I mean, I would have no problem going down the line and giving my opinion of where I sit right now, and who knows, maybe we're all on the same page. Can you go last? I'd be happy to start then and echo what Bob said, or Mike said, I'm sorry. The 2-story with the entrance on 6A is where I sit right now. There's a lot of good features about the others, but to me that seems to be the most common sense approach. I'm very frugal, and I'm concerned about city governments spending or opening up projects that end up costing more than they originally budgeted. And we hear it on the news and in the Oregonian every day. And this, whether it's the option 4 or the 2-story, it seems like a very well-known project. And so I want to go the safe route.
Who's next?
Generally, I go for option 4 with the option 1, the 2-story with the 6th Street exit a close second. With option 4, I think it's a good marrying of, it just seems like more like a living room, more like an accessible space where we do diminish some of the park space, but it opens it up into it includes it into the building, so it's kind of taking the park in the building and bringing them together. I like the efficiency of it, and with option 5, I do worry about the expenses of not only construction but of maintenance and the amount of water that we've potentially got going down there. And once it's there, it's there. We have to maintain it, and if there is a problem with any mechanical system, we've got to deal with it, and we can't change our minds and go to a more above ground approach.
Okay. Option 1, 6th Street entrance.
Option 1, 6th Street entrance for me too. That would be. Yeah.
Heard from me. You ready, Dan?
Option 1, 6th Street entrance.
Okay, this guy's just down to me, right? I like.
You're not off the hook yet.
I like option 1, 6th Street entrance, and I wanted to explain my reasoning. I don't think anybody's discussed the new parking area that we have, and I think, if I understand exactly where it is off of Jefferson, would be a better approach, especially for people that may need that on the 6th Street side. And it's a larger building by 1,000 square feet. It takes up a smaller footprint on the lot. I said better access to parking. Maintains the most of the current park space. And with the new building, we wouldn't have to address the front of the Carnegie building. It would remain as it is, which I know is sacred to some. A close second, though, is option 4, and it would be, I could be very supportive if that new park space was a certainty, with the new spray features and maybe some other spaces, possibly on the 7th Street and John Adams in that area, something in that area. But my first choice is the 2-story option with 6th Street entry. So, I guess Katie.
I am torn between the option 1 and the option 4, but I guess I'd have to say that option 4 would win out for me. The main reasons being, and I think that Sean said it at the last meeting, this isn't just a McLaughlin library, it's a library to service a much, much larger community. And then the other comment that resonated with me was that it's not just about the library, it's integrating indoor and outdoor space, and it's going to be a jewel, it's going to be a magnet, and it's going to draw large communities. Our last meeting, we watched a wonderful little video about how beneficial parks are. And if we can draw people who wouldn't otherwise access this park space and area, as diminished as it is, I think that that's benefiting the parks in general, because it will expose people to using a park that might not otherwise, and then that might lead them to go explore the other parks in our community. So I would say option 4.
Okay, do we need a motion and an action?
I would recommend that, since this is such a significant topic, that you would have somebody raise a motion and then see where that motion goes. Can I just make a quick comment? And I don't think this is going to affect the motion, but the discussion about the mitigation of the open space that would be lost, I guess, with either of the two options that PRAC seems to be talking about is, I just want to make it clear that there's no requirement to do that, and that hasn't been specifically discussed as far as on the staff level. That's something that we could talk about down the road as this progresses. But there, I can't speak for the library project in terms of that they're going to be able to commit any funding or not, and so forth. So I just want to make sure that wasn't left out there kind of dangling and with some other expectation of that.
Okay. Hear a motion?
I'd make a motion that the Park and Rec Advisory Committee recommend to the City Commission an option 1 and an option 2 in a priority order. I'm not sure how exactly to word this, but the number 1 with the 6th Street entrance as our primary recommendation based on open space and least impact on the park. Our second choice would be option 4, and that we would urge the City Commission to make it a priority to mitigate lost park space in other areas of the McLaughlin Neighborhood Association.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor.
Who seconded that?
And a second?
I did.
Thanks, Mike.
Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Same sign. Motion carries unanimously.
Okay. All right. Adjourn. And the meeting's adjourned at 7:55 p.m. Thank you. Thank you.